Behind me is the beautiful little chapel of Father Stephen Jacovi, who comes from the community of Janjevo, whose inhabitants are called Janjevici. Now, I really care about this video because I come from a family of Irish Catholics, and I'll do my best to not butcher all of the names throughout the video I'm making about Albanian Catholicism, so I'll just call him Father Stephen. Father Stephen was considered the father of Albanian folklore studies. When the Catholics would come to these parts of the world, they would do their best to record whatever folk traditions they had and make them fit with their Catholic faith. He was considered a pioneer of the studies of the local people, and he really put pen to paper to preserve their oral histories. And this is Father Stephen's old church. The plaque on the wall there says that he was a zealous collector of Albanian cultural stories. He's buried in here on the right. Now, Father Stephen was ethnically Albanian by birth, but he was born in Janjevo, where he picked up the Catholic faith. The Janjevici are a fascinating group of people because they're proven to be, Croatian diaspora who settled there centuries ago, mostly for the mining communities. We still have churches of the Sassi community, the Saxon community that was brought in the Middle Ages to help mine for metals around the same area. And this community to the southeast of what's now the capital of Kosovo, in Pristina, was a hub of Catholicism in the middle of an area which had quite a few practicing Muslims and Orthodox people. By the mid-1920s, Father Stephen's interests in Albanian history and folklore had drawn the attention of Serbian authorities, so one day in mid-October 1929, two men dressed as soldiers, they probably were soldiers, knocked on his door and told him he'd been summoned to appear in Prizren. He thought nothing of it, gathered two friends and made the journey, but upon arriving in town, was told that nobody had called on him. So he and his two friends talk, and immediately everybody realizes this is an attempted ambush. As soon as they're out on their own, somebody would assassinate the priest. Well, his two friends said, "We have urgent business and should probably be leaving," and the father knew that there would be safety in numbers, or so he thought, so as soon as they crossed the River Drin to head back, the two men, dressed as soldiers, took shots at him, and one of which struck him right above the eye. This murder was never solved, but it was clearly a killing perpetrated by the Serbian government, or at least by two specifically xenophobic Serbian soldiers. I'll just pan around the cemetery now in the shadow of Father Stephen's church. And by the way, this isn't in Prizren. I'll put the name of the town in the video. It's a little hard to pronounce, and I don't want to butcher anything more than I already have. The Catholic community in northern Albania proper is the majority, but here in Kosovo, where it's mostly Islamic, it's very interesting to see monuments like these. And by the way, Albanians in Kosovo today are by a large majority mostly Islamic, but what really stands out to me is that communities like the one that surrounds us still survive, either Orthodox or Catholic. And I'm especially interested in the Catholic community because I do come from a Catholic family. And even driving into this village, it's surrounded by several others where I saw large bronze statues of Catholic priests, of Christian cemeteries. And I guess for the next couple hours, I'll sort of traipse around and show you some of the Christian sites. And here's a family grave of the Berisha family, a very famous family here in Kosovo, over the beautiful countryside. And we're not too far outside of Prizren now. And there's some beautiful photos of the Lakai family. Actually, they have quite a few family plots in this Catholic cemetery. You can see them all here in the shadow of Father Stephen's church. And a much larger, newly made Catholic church. beautiful to see something like this in Kosovo. I know I'm not going to pronounce this right, but this church is in the shadow of Father Stephen's original chapel. You can see it on the back left, and I believe it's in the town of Karashenjerj, but I'll put the name in the description again. Sorry if I'm butchering all of these names, I really am. And we're standing right now in a beautiful pavilion, but I just want to kind of show you how pretty these mountains are that overlook all these sites. And I see some monuments to Father Luigi as well. He's on the stained glass on the left. He died young, and I'm wondering, he was almost certainly killed. I'd like to know more about him, but I don't really have any signal here. But Kosovo and Albania are both two beautiful and amazing places if you'd like to learn more about your Catholic roots. And just outside the village where Father Stephen is buried, I've noticed something interesting about this little cemetery that actually looks to be very old. I don't see any stars and crescents or Islamic symbolism on any of these graves, but I also don't see any crosses. What I do see, the symbolism of the tree and the flowers, and that includes some very beautiful painted flowers on many of these graves. And also in the back of the cemetery, you've got many large rock pillars. Now that flower symbolism I haven't seen at any other cemeteries in Kosovo, but maybe I'm not looking in the right cemeteries. I'll be exploring, hopefully if I have enough time, the cemeteries of the crypto-Catholics to the south of the country, and I expect maybe I'll see a few there as well. In fact, this is the same surname that I saw mostly in the churchyard in town around Father Stephen's church. And in the shadow of that old cemetery, we have some deaths from the Kosovo War who seem to have actually died in the conflict. And you can see, I believe it's 4 men. And this is the small town of Zim. The chapel of Father Stephen is just about 5 minutes up the road there, but I saw this big bronze statue, and sure enough, it looks to be him. I'll give you a better look of it down there at the square, but look how pretty that is. We're here again in Zim, and you can see the surnames Prikeplai. I'm sure there's also Kaklai, which is another common surname for Albanian Catholics. And right here in the cemetery is St. Catherine's Church in Zim. And there's a beautiful piece of art of St. Catherine right here. And you can see in the churchyard cemetery here. Many more crosses on the graves. There aren't as many people buried here, but it's still very impressive to see. And so many graves of the Prekeplai family. It's 8:40 in the morning outside of town, Janjovi.
In 300 meters, turn right.
The streets seem pretty deserted, but obviously there are cars here. This part of town looks very much abandoned, sadly. But there is a nice Catholic church up here.
Then continue straight.
It's hard to tell which house is which, but I'm looking for Father Stephen's house. This is the house that he was summoned from in 1929 by those two soldiers who told him he had a meeting in Prizren. Now, a lot of these houses are not very clearly marked. They're marked that they're being repaired as a project of one or another EU mission, but they don't really say what they are on here. The Catholic Church, by the way, is that white building to the right. I think most likely Father Stephen's home is one of these back here, because that's what it sort of looks like on Google Maps. No, actually, Google Maps was wrong. All the photos I see of it show this. Google Maps marks it as a Baha'i house of worship, which it just isn't. I hope one day to see this as a nice museum. It might draw a little bit more attention to this small village, whose heyday seems to be long behind it. And from Father Stephen's home, we pass this well, and we're going to try to look for the old Catholic cemetery right up here. The Janjovici Cemetery. And to think that the father probably walked these same steps to get up to the cemetery. And an interesting fact I've mentioned in a couple of my other videos, a cemetery is a plot of graves without a church directly attached to it, and a graveyard is in the churchyard. And it's a beautiful village. Some of these houses are really well maintained, but I've been turned back because some of this area is private property, and I didn't want to walk through someone's yard, so I'm going to go around and see the cemetery from the other angle. And some effort is obviously being made to repair these buildings, but I'm interested in the Catholic Church back here. And in the shadow of the Catholic Church, you've got the Croatian Center, so far away from Croatia. And what a bummer. This truck blocked a clearly very ancient gravestone built into the side of the Croatian Center. But here's another beautiful ancient grave slab built into the side of the Catholic Church. And I'm not sure who specifically is buried back here, but 1918 and 1911. I'll have to do some more research. You've also got Mother Teresa. It took some effort to get up here to the Janjivici Cemetery, but I absolutely recommend it because it gives you the prettiest view of the entire village. And don't really let looks deceive you. The weather today is not the best, but on a normal day this would look even more pretty than it already does. The first thing I'm seeing, many graves from the Durick family. And some with Cyrillic spelling. I don't speak the language. I'm pretty sure that that is Durick. And amid all of the decay, you have a very nice house, even with a swimming pool. And this child was very young when he passed away, Nikola Palik. And many more members of the Palich family. And I should point out that this community is Croatian Catholic, but many Albanian Catholics also moved here and coalesced around here, as well as Serb Catholics and every other nationality you can really imagine. This is a very nice gravestone for the Rodic family, and I see, like many other families and Catholic cemeteries, they have quite a few grave plots. I'll have to do my research and look into it. I'm not finding anything on Google right now, but Ansic, Michael, and his brother Ivan died very young in 1985. And these are buried in the family plot with Anton. And most likely their grandparents. I've seen this grave style in America where people who were illiterate would just put beautiful symbols on the headstone. And this is an older grave from 1898. I'm assuming that a lot of these families came in later and put up modern gravestones for their relatives. A very old grave slab, now unreadable, but if you cleaned it, it would be pretty easy to make out what it says. This is another interesting monument to somebody who died young. He's buried under his nickname, Rocco. Right here next to his parents. I love the very stern look of Balkan parents and grandparents. More to what I said about families coming in later and erecting monuments to their loved ones many, many decades after they passed. And at the gates of the cemetery, you have some of these very nice homemade gravestones. Some of these aren't even that old. This one is 1910, and this one 32. I love the designs. You can tell the family actually carved these. Another young man, Antich Leon. And his extended family, Tona Antich, who died in 1967. Some of these graves make me question the backstory behind these people. Now, it would almost be impossible to find out what specifically happened to Vitka Dotic, but he was born in 1924 and died in 1943, middle of World War II. And here's another unusual gravestone. Tuna and Philip Palich. Philip actually died fairly young as well. And whenever I visit graveyards and cemeteries like this, I'm really sad I'm not able to stay around all day and tell everybody's stories, especially such an unusual community here in the heart of Kosovo. But I do hope to move around and later today show you some more Catholic sites. Today's actually my last day here in Kosovo. So before you leave a cemetery like this, on to the next stop, make sure to say a prayer for the dear departed. I'm about 10 minutes north of the town of Mitrovica in the beautiful St. Peter's Basilica, or colloquially called the Sassi Church, named after the Saxons who came from Saxony to work for the mines of Novo Brdo. This subject, Catholicism in Kosovo, is often overlooked in favor of either Serbian Orthodoxy or Albanian Islam, perhaps also a little bit of Albanian Catholicism, but the idea that I wanted to show you is that Kosovo, as far back as the Middle Ages, was a melting pot of different cultures. That's because the Serbian king, Stefan Milutin, invited Saxon miners, who were well known for their ability to work the earth, to the town of Novo Brdo, where they would work for Ragusan merchants selling and trading ore that would go across all of Europe. And these men brought with them a form of Catholicism that would change the social fabric of religion in that region. The reason I think this is so interesting and important is because Catholicism did play an integral role in Kosovo, and it demonstrates that as far back as the 13th century, different religions were present in all corners of the Balkans, and they formed a vibrant fabric of civilization. And while this church is beautiful, it's been mostly left to decay. Very few people have made the effort to repair it, and although there's a bit of scaffolding, historians have been shouting from the rooftops that it should be renovated. However, because it's not an Orthodox monastery or an old Albanian Catholic church, most sides have forgotten about the Sassi Church, 10 minutes north of Mitrovica. And someone from the village allowed me in. They said this mosque used to be much larger. It's about 300 years old. Ottoman and Austro-Hungarian. Because of war, the original one was destroyed. You saw the minaret outside for it, and this is what's left. They reconstructed it. And there are some beautiful Ottoman-style graves. And the tomb is in the shadow of the fort up there on the hill. And I think these might be abandoned, but it's important to kind of point out that the minerals in the area were so bountiful that there are still mines in the shadow of this medieval fortress, which was set up to support miners from Germany, from Saxony, and merchants from Ragusa. And it's so sad that this church was toppled, because you can tell the craftsmanship. This is a type of conglomerate called pudding stone, and this looks like some kind of a sandstone. So to alternate those, it meant that they truly cared about the work that they put into the church. We're driving into the community of Seeger right now, and I'd like to tell you a little bit about the crypto-Catholics in this small little town. Really fascinating story. We're going to head up to their cemetery right now. In a recent article for uscatholic.org, it was describing how Albanian Kosovoers were discovering or rediscovering their Catholic roots. Bishop Dode Gjergi actually made a statement saying that on the census, you can see about 3% of people in Kosovo are Catholic, 90% are Islamic, and the remainder are another religion or mostly no religion at all. Now, he says when you break these numbers down, only about 10% are practicing Muslims, and the rest are cultural Muslims. This bishop claims that Catholicism was the religion of the land prior to the Ottoman occupation. The Ottomans were here around the 15th century, and they stayed here until 1912. Now, after this, the crypto-Catholic communities were in a bit of an odd place. See, the crypto-Catholics came into existence because the Ottomans demanded a religious tax from people who were not Islamic. So usually, you could tell a crypto-Catholic family because it was mostly Muslim men and Catholic women. These Muslim men would then go home and say their Catholic prayers with candles in the windowsill and not have any public churches. And this community of Seeger is actually talked about in this article about rediscovering Catholic roots among the Albanians, especially here in Kosovo, because this understanding is already mostly public knowledge in the north of Albania, which is almost entirely Catholic. That same bishop had a pretty interesting quote from the article. I want to read it to you verbatim. The Islamic experience is not something that Albanians really wanted, but something that was imposed on them. The Christian history is stronger than the Ottoman history. Very straightforward. I want to read a quote by Jetin Thaci, who coordinates all of the baptisms of Catholic converts here in Kosovo, who said that social pressure against the Laramans, a different word for crypto-Catholics, was very strong. He said, one reason is the mentality, because if one family or one circle were always Muslims, if someone changes religion and takes a new religion, it's not easily accepted by others. Not everyone is brave enough to face these realities. Now, according to this article for US Catholic, this village we're standing in right now is about half Islamic, or half Muslim, cultural Muslim, the bishop would say, and half crypto-Catholic, although the crypto-Catholics really don't like to talk about it because of the social stigma, especially when we get into these mountainous regions where families have been close to each other for centuries, which has been pointed out by Thacci, who has a very interesting observation to make about it, about how one open convert could sort of tear apart a community. It's not as serious as it would have been centuries ago, but it's still a pretty serious social pressure. And in the same cemetery, we've got the grave of the first political scientist from this local community, from Gilan, which is just outside of this community. This man was very young when he died during the Kosovo War. I wonder if the death was related at all to the conflict. Graves of the Arifis, the Rexhepis, the Haziris, the Mustafas. And you can tell who the obvious Islamic people were because of the minarets on their tombstones. And the minarets for this village are actually right there through the trees. One thing you'll notice about some of these communities is that the Catholic graves are mostly simple stone markers offset to one end of the cemetery, and I'm noticing markers like that right down here. And in the same cemetery is Idris Seferi, who died in 1927 as an older man. He was actually one of the rebels who aided Hakshi Zeka and continued in the League of Peya, the League of Prizren. He fought the Ottomans, he continued the fight after the League was over, and then he fought the Serbs. And then he fought the Austro-Hungarians. He was a true Albanian rebel. And I couldn't make an educated enough guess on the parentheses on the last name, Liman or Hazari, but I've noticed this a couple times in this graveyard and not at all in other graveyards. Perhaps the Catholic name and the Islamic name.